Welcome to another episode of Video Store Rejects. This is a podcast where we discuss directors' filmographies and our favorite film franchises. I'm your host, Cody House. With me is my co host, Chris Jacobs.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
And we have a returning guest, Colin Smith. This time he's come to join us to talk about Ridley Scott. And we're talking, I guess this is kind of a comeback film for Ridley Scott, and it's the Academy Award nominated film Thelma and Louise. Welcome back, Colin.
Thanks for having me. This is one of my favorite films, so I'm excited to get a chance to talk about it.
First off, what are your thoughts on Ridley Scott? Do you like him as a director, or is he kind of somebody where you're like, well, sometimes he makes interesting films and sometimes he just made a movie?
I think that whenever Ridley Scott makes a film, it's worth seeing. I don't always like it. I don't always enjoy it. This past year, with House of Gucci and The Last Duel, neither one really excited me, but there was stuff in both that I found really interesting. He's made about three, I hope I'm not forgetting any, but three of my favorite films of all time. So that says a lot for me and my love of him. I think he's the kind of director that if he makes something, I'll go see it and I'll get something out of it, even if it's not necessarily going to be a film I'll enjoy that much or watch again.
Yeah, I don't really think of him as an auteur director, but like all of his movies, you could probably be like, oh, well, Ridley Scott directed that just by the visual look of the movie. Like he has a distinctive visual style to his films.
He does, but his films, he doesn't have a kind of film that he makes. Like if you look at his catalog, it's all over the map and it's up and down. Like it's hard to, like, I think some people, maybe if they weren't paying attention, would be surprised that some films were directed by him because there's no pattern to how he chooses his projects, it seems. Like the fact that he made, I'm blanking on the what's the film where he replaced Kevin Spacey with Christopher Plummer? Of course, I should have had this handy. Anyways,
All the Money in the World.
All the Money in the World, and Thelma and Louise and Blade Runner, and like it just there's no common thread within those sorts of films, and so I always am very impressed with directors that can be such a chameleon. But I think you're right. I mean, visually, he makes incredible movies. Even if the movie's not very good, I enjoy watching them just for what you can see on screen.
Absolutely. And what do you like about this movie in particular? Why do you love this one so much?
That's a good question. There's just so much about it that I love. It was not a film. Okay, so this might be the first film of his I ever saw, which I know sounds weird, but I saw it by accident. So when it came out, I was pretty young, like just getting into my adulthood, and I was supposed to be meeting friends to see Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and I got there late, and it was sold out, and so I decided, look, I'll get a ticket for something else and I'll meet you after and we'll have our after plans like we were going to do. And so because I was pretty young, I hadn't seen a lot of stuff yet. I don't think I'd seen Alien yet. I don't think I'd seen Blade Runner, for example. And so I had no idea. I just bought it because I'm like, oh, that cast looks good. And it was playing, it was a small multiplex, so there was maybe 5 screens, so there wasn't a ton of choice. So I just thought of all the ones that were there, it looked like the best choice. So I went to see it and was blown away by the story. Like I went into it not knowing what it was going to be about or anything. So you can imagine watching this going, oh my God, what am I watching? And then and just loving it and coming out, and all of my friends were disappointed in Robin Hood. I mean, whatever. I think Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves has its place, and there's things about it that I can enjoy. But I think everybody agreed that I was the winner that night. It was just a really powerful experience, and I think too. I mean, it's 1991, I think that we've come a long way in the way we understand issues around sexual assault and consent and the way that the justice system works around those sorts of things. That at the time it was mind-blowing. Now I think I watch it and I go, I understand maybe a lot more. But at the time, I think it really opened my eyes to a lot that I hadn't considered before.
Well, for the time too, being 91, and let's see, we had Silence of the Lambs that same year. So when you look at those two movies, they were really feminine, strong movies. Female-led movies that both went to the Oscars. Of course, we all know that Lambs cleaned up, but at least they were nominated, and Thelma and Louise got what? Best
Screenplay.
Best original screenplay, which when I saw it I watched it yesterday on HBO Max, and they were, I guess, Turner Classic and Time Warner owns Turner Classic, AT&T owns all that. So I guess they were doing their 31 days of Oscars, and Thelma and Louise, I guess, was one of the spotlight films, and they actually showed just a brief clip of the screenwriter winning her Oscar for the film.
I just watched that on YouTube earlier. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, but, it's sorry, I was gonna say it reminded me sort of last year with the win for Promising Young Woman, a film that I think maybe owes a lot to this film and carries through some of those themes into an even further down the road. So it sort of reminded me when I was looking back at this. But what a great year for films. I was looking at this there's Silence of the Lambs, of course, Beauty and the Beast, which is like a landmark, Boys in the Hood, The Fisher King, Grand Canyon, Cape Fear, Fried Green Tomatoes for the Boys, Barton Fink, Europa, Terminator 2 came out this year. This was an incredible year. I think
it was almost.
Go ahead.
It makes me think of 82 with all those great 80s movies that came out, and then of course this was 91, but still, when you think of 91, like you said, you just named off all of those just great movies.
Well, and some of those really just setting the tone. Like T2 set the tone for with special effects and led into Jurassic Park and other films that would come a few years later. Beauty and the Beast set off an animation renaissance that was incredible. There's a lot here, and I think when I'm reading off that list, I'm realizing, hey, there's a bunch of my favorite movies on this list. I think part of it is my age, that this year really I was just ripe to be taken over, right? And so I think there's a lot of films from this year that just stuck with me forever because I was just really starting to appreciate film in a different way than I had as a teenager or as a kid. So then when I look at this list, I think, wow.
We talk about Thelma and Louise and Silence of the Lambs both being strong films and giving three-dimensional, compelling, interesting female characters that maybe we had not seen on screen before. But I think Beauty and the Beast should get thrown in there too, even though now we could say well, she got Stockholm syndrome and all these, but I think Beauty and the Beast and the character of Belle is the precursor to where Disney would go with their female characters where they are now. I don't think we would have Moana and Encanto where they don't even need a love interest without Belle kind of being the bridge there.
I agree. Right. I think there's a lot of changing of, sort of moving into a new era going on here when we look back at it now. But Thelma and Louise, like I said, it broke me a bit in terms of just understanding things in a new way and really getting perspectives that I'd never seen before. And I remember thinking, it was one of those ones where I can't remember who won Best Actress that year, but you kind of...
It's Jodie Foster.
Jodie Foster, right, of course. Very, very deserving. Okay. But at the same time, both Susan Sarandon and Thelma Louise and Gina Davis and Thelma Louise, it was one of those times when you knew neither would win because they would cancel each other out, sort of thing, right? Which was too bad because, again, watching it, the performances are just so amazing. I mean, it's great that Susan Sarandon got another chance with Dead Man Walking. Another incredible performance by her. But yeah, watching it again, I was like, yeah, these are just incredible performances, and but the rest of the cast too. Like, what a strong cast all around. And I remember
Shooter McGavin, he's great as a douchebag in this. I mean,
yeah.
like he plays Christopher McDonald. I call him Shooter McGavin. So
and Michael Madsen playing against type, like he's the nice guy. I mean, he's still problematic, and we can get into some of that. But when do we ever see him play the nice guy, right?
Is he kind of a nice guy in Free Willy?
Okay, maybe I'd forgotten Free Willy.
But
and Brad Pitt was like, who's Brad Pitt when this came out? Like, he was just like some nobody.
If you noticed, I don't know if you guys noticed, but yeah, this is like not his first movie, but like his first breakout role. If you notice, like at the end with the credits, the character actor Steven Tobolowsky, I'm probably butchering his last name, but the guy who plays Ned from Groundhog Day.
Yeah,
he's billed because he's the FBI agent. He's billed higher than Brad Pitt. That's probably the only time in movie history that guy would be billed higher than Brad Pitt in a movie.
Yeah, I bet he points that out to his friends too. It's like, hey, no, he's a great actor though too. Like, he's a great character actor. Like, he's in everything, and you see him, and he's always fun to see, and he's perfect for this role too. Like, he's the foil for Harvey Keitel, again, kind of playing against type, being being somewhat more sympathetic, even though I do think this film does try to make a bit of a thesis that all men are shit, and that we can sort of get into some of that. But in terms of the rankings of them, him and Michael Madsen sort of get a lot more sympathy than most of the rest of them do.
Yeah. Before we get too deep into the movie, what you brought up when you said you saw this, I just want to acknowledge, I think that's a time that will never exist again, where people go to the movie theaters and just pick a movie at random. I don't think that happens anymore. I don't think people go, oh, I like those actors, I'll check this movie out. I think people now know exactly what they're going to go see when they go to the theater. Like, it doesn't.
Maybe it's a streaming thing now, though. Maybe now it's like you're sitting there with Netflix and you're going, oh, look who's in that. I'll watch that for a little bit. Maybe.
The last time I remember doing that, it was just when there was this entire summer in my mid-20s, early 20s, where I would drive, and it's about 45 minutes to an hour to the largest city from where we lived, but I would get off of work every day at 4, go home, shower, and I would drive the hour and just go watch whatever. And this was, 2006, 2005, 2006, but they were still pumping out decent movies, in that time. But you're talking about just randomly, I used to do that. I would just go. I didn't know, like, I kind of kept up with what was coming out, but not with everything. And I would go up there and I would buy a movie ticket and just, like, I chanced it with Cinderella Man and Kill Bill. And I mean, stuff that I know Kill Bill's a big one, and you're like, how were you not paying attention to that? But believe me, there was lots of stuff that went under the radar. But
yeah, well, that reminds me of my childhood. Like, I've been a film buff my entire life. Like, I remember when my parents first took me to my first few movies, I was just hooked. And so when I got old enough to walk over to the mall that was near my house that had a little multiplex, again, pretty small one. In this case, it was about 5 screens, but still, I would just go Saturday afternoon. That was my plan. I would just take my money. I would show up and see what was playing that day and just pick something and go. And that was me at like 10, 11, whatever it was, right? And saw some great stuff, saw some crappy stuff, but it was a fun way to just expose yourself to stuff. And like I said, maybe today that's different. Maybe for today's kids or teens, it'll be streaming that they do that with, right? Because there's no investment. You can just try it. Oh, I'm not liking this, I can turn it off. In some ways, though, that's too bad, because sometimes, you at first you're like, and then it gets to the point where you're there and you're glad you sort of stuck through it. When you've bought a movie ticket, you kind of feel like you stick through it. But with streaming, it's easy to just stop and switch to something else.
Right.
Or just start playing on your phone or whatever electronic device you have as the movie's playing, because you're like, it's okay. I'll just have it on for background noise instead of being fully invested or immersed. So I guess the first thing we'll bring up, since you brought it up with the Academy Awards, I mean, it's kind of hard to deny the powerhouse of Silence of the Lambs and the performances, and an interesting thing that I think both of these movies do, not as much as in this one as they do with Lambs, but they both kind of explore the themes of like maybe men are shitty. But what I love about Silence of the Lambs, and it's interesting because it's a male cinematographer and a male director, but it's like they obscure the male gaze and make us like feel the male gaze on us, like we're in Clarice's shoes, like feeling what she's seeing. But what's interesting in this one is I feel like they focus more on like gazing on Brad Pitt than we do Sarandon or Gina Davis in this movie, like with those shots with him without his shirt on and everything. Like,
oh yeah, no, for sure. And I think there's a little bit of that element with Michael Madsen too. They don't sort of focus on him being naked, but they do sort of create this desirable man for her to have to walk away from, right? And for her to have to make that choice, and for them to choose each other, right? Like with Brad Pitt, it ends up being easy to choose because he ends up being just as much of a dick as it. Well, maybe not as much of a dick, but he's, but he steals from them, so it's it's easy to move on from him. But I find that part interesting, is that they make her have a situation that is harder for her to walk away from, or gives her a choice, and then them choosing each other instead over that, I think is again a really powerful message that the film gets at. That, I mean, it has a female screenwriter, but I think much of like the director and again cinematographer, there's a lot of sort of men working on this film, and which is surprising to see how much they capture of that, whether it's the female gaze or just inverting the tropes of the male gaze. Maybe that's more what they're accomplishing. I mean, certainly Brad Pitt is cast for a reason. He's there to be somewhat ogled, and there's and certainly that's part of the appeal of the movie, but it is used, I think, in a really constructive way because of how, like, his character isn't just there as eye candy. I mean, it's playing a significant plot point, and
he's the opposite of Christopher McDonald. He's
right.
supposed to be he's supposed to be the pretty boy and the lure, the temptation.
That's right.
Well, he's also charming.
Yes.
Like
right.
Christopher McDonald, you're like, which apparently Gina Davis and Christopher McDonald used to date in real life.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And she actually suggested him for the role, but like you're watching.
Did she know something about him?
You're watching this movie and you're like, why is she with this tool like this?
Right.
like
well,
but I mean,
you know what? And they set it up too, because she's you hear, again, this is coming from a male perspective, from what I've seen of battered women who are in those situations. And if I'm wrong, please, someone feel free to step in and correct me. But a lot of them just get in there and they are so abused to the point to where they don't think any different than, I can't do any better than this, or I can't afford to leave, or I can't do that, or he'll kill me, or he'll, So she's the classic. Was he physically abusive, or was he?
We don't see signs of that. I think he's definitely verbally abusive, and it's just more of a control,
and mentally, in control of. So, she represents that just battered woman, and then of course, what happens at the bar doesn't help. So
but I mean,
the screenplay is so well done because they draw the backstories of these women so well without telling us overtly, right? Like they give us so much that we can read into, maybe make some assumptions, but but it just, you feel like you know Thelma and Louise, right? Like you feel like they're so completely done. We learn more about, like, you know, Louise is more sort of shielded throughout at the beginning, but we learn more about her as the movie sort of moves along. But through each other, through their interactions with each other, through the amazing performances by the two lead actors, like they create these characters so fully. And I feel like we don't know exactly what was going on for Thelma, but we feel like we can really know her and really understand. Like, that's the thing, is they make a lot of bad choices, but we feel like we can understand each and every one of them being made, right? And so I'm just so blown away by the screenplay and the two performances in terms of just making these characters so 100% real.
Yeah, I mean, across the board, especially these two women are just incredible performances. Maybe if not their best performances, it's up there. And talking about, like, yeah, maybe they putting them both up for best actress might have, like, hurt them, actually one of them winning. But I mean, like, I know this day and age they probably would have tried to put one of them in a supporting, but it's like, but
But
how do
they're
you do
not. They're
that?
both the leads. Yeah,
What?
they're
It's
not.
Thelma and Louise, and the movie says Susan Sarandon and Gina Davis
Yeah.
together. It doesn't, like, say blah blah. Like, it's kind of
No.
hard to separate them. So
No, 100%. They're both leads. They couldn't have, unless they could make it a tie and have them both win. But I mean, they do a great job.
what's interesting, bringing up again Jodie Foster winning over them, is she actually was supposed to be in this movie with Michelle Pfeiffer. It was supposed to be Michelle Pfeiffer and Jodie Foster, and for whatever reason they backed out, our production, and halted or something, and they took on other projects. And Michelle Pfeiffer even suggested that Ridley Scott direct this, because he wasn't originally going to direct this movie. He was just going to produce it because he liked the script.
Right.
And I read some of the directors that were considered, but I had heard somewhere that apparently Ridley Scott was going to direct Point Break at one point, and Catherine Bigelow was going to do this at some point, which would have been an interesting thing. But I mean, I do really love Bigelow's kind of take on the action movie and doing that vulnerable masculinity that you normally wouldn't see in action films. But I mean, I guess it worked out for both of them, because this was a financial and critical success, and Ridley had made a couple of films that did not do well either way. And I mean, at this point, Blade Runner is being reevaluated, but, like, I don't think he had made really a hit movie since Alien. I think Black Rain did okay financially, but this was like a return to form, and he gets a Best Director nomination off of this. Of course, he loses to Jonathan Demme for Silence of the Lambs, but this is a
thinking about having to choose between that Best Director lineup. I don't know. It's an interesting year because it seemed like there was a big disparity between the Best Pictures and Best Directors, and often they line up really close. But this year it felt there was, and I think it just shows the strength of the films. Like, there was just so many great films that they, probably was really close to who made the cut in the end, because it was just such a great year.
Yeah, because John Singleton is also nominated for Boys in the Hood, which also was not nominated for Best Picture. And it's like, and then, well, I think one of them gets in because they don't nominate Beauty and the Beast directors because it's animation.
Well, they also didn't nominate Barbara Streisand for the Prince of Tides.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, there's only so many slots, I guess, but it's be interesting to see how close it sort of came different ways. But yeah, no, this I think this movie made me a Ridley Scott fan. I think that after seeing this, I started to, because again, I was just at that age where I was starting to pay attention to, who's the director? Do I want to see, if I like their film, do I want to go see more of their films? I've come to see that doesn't necessarily always matter. But at the time I thought, oh yeah, if I like one of their films, I'll like all of them. So this made me seek out other stuff. And I mean, eventually I would have seen Blade Runner, I'm sure, but I do think that it sort of inspired me to go watch it and things like that. But yeah, like I said, because of the way I saw it, it surprised me, and then I think it had even more impact on me because I was blown away. I spent we went for dinner afterwards, and I spent the whole time basically telling them everything about the movie and how great it was.
I think I was like eight when this came out, and I remember my parents renting it, and I guess it got to the scene at the bar, the first scene where she gets assaulted, and they were like, nope, okay, you go to the other room. And I was like, oh. Right. So it wasn't until a few years later where I was sitting there renting my own videos, and I remember picking it up like, okay, I'm going to watch this because they said I couldn't watch it before, and that's when I'm going to check it out. And I watched it, and I was like, wow, that was a damn good movie. That was really great. And it did. It was being such a probably 12, 13 at this point when I watched it, it really did make things stand out as far as the way men act and how the way they're portrayed, and brought to light, sexual assault, because, when you're younger, you don't, you don't pick up on that a lot. And it really did. It was an eye opener for sure. Just on top of being a great movie and having great female leads, because again, that was something that even in the early '90s you just didn't see a whole lot of. So,
I think one of the reasons you don't think about those things maybe as much is because so much of our media romanticizes those things, right? Like, I think I remember, and again, I don't know if I'm laying this on because it was so long ago, but I think I remember thinking about, hey, often when we see this bit in a movie, we're supposed to think they're falling in love, right? Like when he grabs her and makes him kiss her, even though she's sort of resisting slightly, and then like that trope is just so common. Like when I watch some old movies and even some of my favorite ones, I think, but it's at the time, I think this was the first time it dawned on me, wait a minute, maybe it's not romantic when someone forces you to kiss them.
No, because I mean, yeah, that has been such a trope in movies. Even when this movie comes out, I think that is still a trope in like films where like they become romantically involved, but like there's always that scene of like, no, you come here, and it's like, no, that's not cool. And
right.
And like then we realize in that scene where like it's about to happen and everything's so traumatic and frightening, and like they're gonna get away, but then he says what he says, and Louise, and then we eventually learn out because of Louise's past, that's why she's just like, you know what, buddy, screw you.
Yeah.
You don't deserve to live.
But I like that they actually react to that. Like, we see her later, very soon after, getting out of the car and vomiting, and we see Thelma's sort of going comatose a little bit, and like I feel like the film does such a good job of showing how real people react in trauma situations, as opposed to just like action movies where you shoot somebody and then you're on the run, and and they do all of that and it's exciting, but they also have these very human and very broken kind of reactions. I mean, we're dealing with Louise, whose past is never really clear, but we assume she was sexually assaulted in the past. And how many women that happens to, it's probably likely. And then we see Gina Davis's or Thelma's history with this man that she's married to. Like, these are people who've survived trauma, and so they're reacting like people who have survived trauma. And I think the film does a great job of showing us that and just integrating into the plot. The film never hits us over the head with anything. They just really make it come out in the little dialogue and the interactions between the characters.
Yeah, it's beautifully written, and it gives us all the details we need just through the scenes of them. But yeah, you kill someone, you're gonna freak out. You survive an attempted assault, you're gonna like shut down. And also, just because her husband isn't a physical abuser, I mean, being a control and verbally, like that's a form of abuse of its own, and like that's trauma of its own. Like being in a relationship where someone controls you constantly and you have to tiptoe around their moods or their schedule or what they think you should be doing. Like, that's trauma of itself. Even if it's not physical, it's still abusive and can affect people. And a lot of women are affected by controlling men and who verbally belittle them and degrade them and make them feel
100%.
like they're nothing.
Yeah, I think the characters of Thelma and Louise are way more common than maybe a lot of us want to think is the case. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things the film does. Like I said, I think this was the first time I started thinking about some of this stuff and starting to understand some of this stuff a little bit better than I had before.
Well, and I mean, remember that line where they go to his house and the FBI guy's telling him like how to talk to her on the phone, and like he's like, "Well, women love that shit," and they're all laughing. Well, I feel like Harvey Keitel's only laughing because everyone else is laughing. I don't think like he really thinks that's funny.
I hope this isn't incorrect, but I thought I remember I was looking for it because I wanted to bring this up. I think that was an ad lib. And the cast started laughing because they all thought it was funny, like in the moment, like that they all, because they're playing these douches and they're like, so this is what somebody like that would say, right? And so they all start laughing, and then they kept it in because I think, it works, right? Like it's one of those famous ad libs. But I hope I don't have that wrong. I thought I read that. I looked for it and I couldn't find anything about confirming that's an ad lib, so maybe I'm making that up. But when you watch it, it does feel like it could be one of those moments where one of the actors says something and everybody just cracks up because it's funny. But I mean, it does work because it really is, again, going back to our thesis that the movie is saying all men are shit. There's, because even, like I said, whenever there's a good guy, he doesn't get to be good for that long. Like there's that moment when Michael Madsen, like he's been portrayed as very supportive, very sensitive, and really caring for her, but he has a moment where she tries to go to the door and he like slams it, and in that moment, like I tensed up and I got really fearful, and then I mean he backs down right away. But I mean it shows that even in this situation where she has what seems like a pretty decent guy, there's these moments where maybe he isn't safe, right? And I think again that's just so real, and I'm glad they included that because it would have been really easy for them just to have good guys and bad guys, right? And I think that they instead create their male characters in shades, and some of them are more developed than others, but they do sort of get developed in shades of gray, and not just the sort of this is a good guy, he's nice, and this is the bad guy. Again, they need that for the end. Like she can't just go to him and have him rescue her, right? Like they needed the film to be able to say like nobody can come and rescue them. They have to rescue themselves in whatever way that's going to be.
What's interesting about not just that scene in general, because it shows Michael Madsen's character. Well, he has a temper. We don't know like how bad it is, but obviously he can't control it or lets it. But Susan Sarandon was allowed to make some choices for the film that weren't in the script, like for her character, and Ridley Scott allowed it. Like there's the scene where she exchanges the stuff with that old guy at the gas station or whatever. But in the script,
maybe the one nice guy in the movie.
Yeah. In the script, there's supposed to be a love scene between the two of them, and Susan Sarandon's like, I don't think Louise wants to have sex right now. I don't think her character. So that was like their compromise, was to have like that conversation they have instead.
I think like, that's a better choice. Yes.
I'm so glad that they didn't do that. That would have just detracted from the whole, because you're right. They're both traumatized, and I don't know. I don't know.
I think you're right. I think that, I mean, I think it would do a few things. Like it would undermine, like you're right, like their trauma is specifically from sexual assault and, abusive relationships. So seeking out, I mean, yes, sometimes then you seek out maybe anonymous sex or other kinds of sex to sort of, as a way of self-medicating, but it just doesn't feel like that's where Louise would go for sure. Like, Thelma does a little bit in terms of, hooking up with, what is his name? JD? Is that what his name is?
JD. But
yeah.
I don't want to read into what's going on, but I think that's more of like well, here's something I've never really had
Yeah.
before. Here's
I agree.
this.
kind of rebound,
It's-
getting adventurous, like, you know, I don't know.
Well, this is a charming, hot young guy.
Yeah.
He seems fun. He's like complete opposite of what's her husband's name?
Yeah.
Daryl.
Yeah.
Daryl, yeah.
Which,
JD
no
and
offense to
Daryl.
anyone named Daryl, but that does kind of sound like a douchebag type of.
Yeah. To be
Like, I
honest,
just
so
see
does
someone
JD
holding a
Daryl.
beer in their
in
hand.
our group.
Yeah.
Sorry, Daryls.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna go to Facebook and see if
But-
we have Daryls. Write an apology. Sorry.
But yeah, we do. I
Disclaimer.
mean, and it is kind of an
Daryl.
inversion of what we normally see in these movies, where the action hero gets the younger girl and the cute young girl that, you know, and so we get sort of to invert that a little bit, and I like that it's like it in a way, even though it turns out bad in the end because he ends up stealing from her. I mean, I don't think he sleeps with her because he wants to steal. Like, I mean, I think he plans to steal from her if he can, because he's, I think,
Mhm.
just an asshole like that. But I think he sleeps with her because he's legitimately like attracted to her.
Yeah.
And figure, why not? I'll get some on it as well, right? And then I'll take off with the stuff. But I like that the film is sex positive in the way that it, well, you know, at first, until they realize the money's been stolen, they're like happy about the fact that she, like, I like that she has that moment where she says, now I realize what all the fuss is about, right? Like, there's this idea that she's never had sex in a way that's been pleasurable for her, right? And I think, again, it's just like, for the time and for a lot of audiences, that's like a huge wake-up call, even though for a lot of people, they're all like, they all probably, a lot of women probably see that and go, yep. But go ahead.
I don't want to get into a stereotype, but I feel like there are a lot of men who just, when it comes to sex, just care about getting their pleasure, and they don't care if their partner.
Well, there was that
anything.
whole controversy about Batman and Catwoman, right? Like, in the comics, it's like, why wouldn't Batman do that? Like, it seems strange. So I think there are still this perception that it's about, you know, sort of the men's pleasure. And this movie takes that on, right? And it back in 1991, it goes and it takes that sort of full on, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. I mean, that's the thing about this movie, is like, it never hits us over the head with these things. It works them all in, but it remains like a fully entertaining, fun movie. I mean, it's powerful in times and it's uncomfortable in times, and it's, you know, emotionally, like I said, I came out pretty emotionally wrecked watching it, but it is not a slog. It's not a, like, it's so good all the way through. Like, you're on the edge of your seat and you're watching it all the way through, and it's funny. It's got these moments like that where they're having that interchange in the diner and talking about her having good sex, and it's a fun moment, and you feel the joy for them for that, like, slim moment before things go horribly wrong. But
I do have. Oh, sorry, I interrupted your thought.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say it's entertaining all the way through. It's funny, and it's like when they blow up the guy's truck, it's like you're 100% with them on that. Like, it's just like
that guy had it coming. He was beyond cringy. Not just the typical, like, I'm gonna hit on you. It's like, come on, dude. Yeah. You deserved your truck to get blown up.
We all enjoy that moment. No, even whatever you can say, maybe again, it's another bad decision, but everybody's on board with that moment when it happens.
My one issue with that is, why does Louise give Thelma the money to hold over? Why doesn't Louise just keep the money in her room? It's her money. It's her savings. That who knows how long it took her to save that much money.
Yeah. Right.
Like,
so I was at that moment, you think, why was that in Louise's room with a stranger? Like, you could leave it in Louise's room with, like, Michael Madsen's not going to take it. He brought it to her.
Yeah.
Right? Like, leave it there and hide it away. Right. Like, that was a dumb move, but but they needed that for that, because she has to go rob the bank. Like, that's maybe one of those ones where it's like, okay, the movie makes some choices because they have to get to the next. They have to turn Thelma into this armed robber. Which, again, great moment. Bad choices, but you love it as you're watching it. Like, so good watching her rob that convenience store.
Or she does it so politely too. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, that's when it becomes Butch Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid type of story. Like, and we even get a Butch Cat style ending, Butch and Sundance style ending, like, which is one of the most iconic movie endings, I think.
Oh yeah, I think this movie
film
goes
history.
down in history as one of the best endings for sure. Like people love it, and I know people who are like my mom is like, they land on the other side and drive away to Mexico. That's in her head canon. She needs that to happen. So I'm like, fine, enjoy that. There's a lot of people I think who embrace that ending, but yeah.
But I think that gets back to they choose each other, right? Like,
yes.
Like, I think Louise has mostly a good relationship with whatever Michael Madsen's name is. Like, I think he's probably like the most, between him and Harvey Keitel, they're probably like the closest to a decent man
Jimmy
in the movie.
Yes.
But like she's has her trauma from her past, which kind of leads him down this path.
Yeah. You can tell she's already been keeping him at arm's length to a certain degree, right? Like they're not living together. They're not like getting married. She's seeing him and he's a good man. And he generally, I mean, like I said, we see some moments that maybe question that, but generally he's a good man. But she's keeping him at arm's length. It's her, not him. I think that's pretty clear. He drives across the country. I don't know how far. Was it Arkansas? Where are they about the time? I've lost
They
track
live
of some
in
of the geography.
Arkansas, and then they're in Oklahoma City.
So I don't know how far that is.
That's a decent drive.
Yeah. So, let's see. Hot Springs is a good 6.5 hours from here. So you'd probably hit Arkansas in about 4.5.
Yeah, it's at least probably a 4-hour drive.
Yeah.
So
depending on where they are in Arkansas.
Yeah. He I think if he had his way, he'd marry her. But I think it's her that's saying, hey, just, I'm not there. So I wanted to ask you guys, because you guys both live in Texas, right? How does this movie feel with the references to Texas and her trauma and everything that goes on there?
I mean, that's my favorite line in the movie, though, is where she's like, when you shoot a man with his pants down, the last place you want to get caught is Texas, which is true.
Great line.
You do not want to get caught in Texas when you are potentially going to be charged with murder, because I don't, but the state of Texas very much loves the death penalty. And it's...
Well, I mean, she did murder him. Like, I mean, there's no, like, that's part of the thing. Like, again, in the moment, like, again, I think that's, first of all, it's a shocking moment. Like, you go to the movie, again, I didn't know what it was going to be about. I'm watching this happen. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Like, these women have gone through some shit and, they're going to have, and then the sexual assault happens. You're like, oh my God, like, this is, and it's filmed in a way that's good. Like, I feel like it doesn't titillate. It doesn't like shoot it in a way where there's any kind of like titillation of it, but it also shows you the impact. And because he turns violent quick too.
Drop of a hat, which I think is realistic. I mean, I can't say I've never been a victim or around something like that, but I think when you hear people's stories, that happens like that. You meet somebody, everything seems fine, they're friendly, they're chatty, you're having a good time, and then when they get you alone, everything goes dark, and especially if you try to resist.
Which is why legally, so I'm a lawyer, so I have some knowledge of some of this sort of stuff, which is why legally sexual assault is so hard for the law to deal with, because it's just so. But then when she kills him, like, it is a shocking moment. Like, unless you saw the trailers or something that revealed that was coming, I think that the first time you see this, you're like, oh my God, because she does murder him. And I mean, maybe you understand where she's coming from, and the movie helps you understand later even more why she would react the way that she did, but she still kills him. And so, and I mean, you see that in Harvey Keitel, his character, you get a sense that he understands that there are extenuating circumstances here, but at the same time, he would have his hands tied. I mean, she killed him. Like, there's not that much he can do to save her. Like, and I think that's important for a lot of reasons, because I think it highlights the theory of the movie that women get a really shitty end of the stick in the way our culture is laid out, and victims of sexual violence get a really shitty end of the stick. But and that there isn't the ending is kind of inevitable. Like they don't have a lot of other choices unless they surrender. And like she would have gone to jail. She would have been convicted of murder. You know, Thelma would have been convicted of armed robbery. Like it would not have ended well for them.
Is there, since you are a lawyer, I want to ask, is there any way it could have been like a reduced murder instead of first degree? Could have been like,
So I don't know much about. So where did they get? So if the crime happened in Arkansas, would it have been prosecuted there? I assume so. I don't know as much about American law, but I assume that. I don't know. I'm not optimistic. I'm not a criminal lawyer. I did practice criminal law for a little while, not murders. It was early in my career, so I wasn't doing murders. I'm not optimistic that because Louise says it like it wasn't self-defense. Like she says it right out. It wasn't self-defense. You guys, they had gone away. They were on their way out. Like he wasn't doing anything but being, cruel to them at that point, right? So it's. I mean, she could have maybe pled momentary insanity. I don't know. Like it. I don't know.
Right.
Again, I don't know if there's.
You think they would have taken the fact that now we're talking about the first encounter, right? With the where so could she have what she did was wrong, and she even said that you couldn't really use self-defense because he wasn't attacking them, but he was attacking her up to that point.
Right. So the standard for self-defense is that you have to use reasonable force to end the risk to you. Right. So at the time that it was happening, there was no physical violence risk. I mean, his pants were down around his ankles. Like he couldn't even have chased them down at that point. Like,
well, what I'm saying is they could have, if you were defending them, you could have said, look, what she did was wrong. So take into account that she did stop.
Right. I mean, hopefully, her sentence.
And that was a motive. That contributed to her motive in killing him because he was going to rape. Now, does she need to be punished? Yes, but keep that in account. Keep that in mind when you are sentencing her. So.
Well, I think again, not my area and it's not my jurisdiction at all. But I think that more likely saying, look, she had because of her past trauma and all the things that happened to her in the past, which means she would have to bring all of that up, which of course is just further victimizing her. Because of that, she had a momentary lapse in insanity, and in that moment, she wasn't thinking. She, blacked out or whatever she did because of that. That might be the more likely way to be able to get something. But this just shows like, okay, so when you look at everything that happened, she shouldn't have killed him. But when you look at everything that happened in the end, she would be the one going to jail. And I guess he's dead. But I mean, of all the stuff that he did, like, again, and again, they would have just been re-traumatized by having to go through the whole legal process. And I think this is one of those areas that really just shows how bad the legal system handles these kind of situations. When you have the kind of legal system that we in the Western world tend to have around prosecutions and things like that, sexual assault just leads to the kind of situations where there's no win. And this is why, what are the percentages in the single digits of sexual assaults that get convictions? Like they're literally in the single digits percentage wise of sexual assaults that lead to convictions. And this is why, because the vast majority of people don't report them because they know that that'll be worse than just trying to move on with your life. Right. Yeah. And I think this movie does a great job of showing that. Because, I mean, the thought of Louise going to jail for murder, I mean, the audience is like, shit, that sucks. Even though intellectually you know that she murdered him.
By law, she's going to go to jail. But you're like, yeah, but he was a rapist. Like, it's okay.
Like, right. Yeah. That's what I'm getting at. It's just, it's like you know what she did was wrong. And you know that she's going to have to be punished. You just don't want her. You don't want to see it happen because you know why she did it and the circumstances.
And even the waitress, like, of course he's done this before because someone who's done that does that so quickly has probably done it before. But she even hints like that he has a reputation for that. She's like, I always knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
Is either a woman or somebody's husband.
I like it when she says, "I hope it's his wife that came down here." I like that she says that. That's a great line too. But yeah,
And like, did they hit? Like, there's something going on between her and Harvey Keitel.
well, yeah, I don't know, but you know what I like too? There's a little throw, and maybe it's a throwaway line, but I think it actually hints to something more as well. When the waitress says, she repeats it a few times. That's why I don't necessarily think it's throwaway. I think that the script is trying to tell us something. Is that she says those two couldn't have done it. Like they don't have it in them. She says this like a few times, and I think that what that's showing is, like, it's saying like when a whole class of people within a society are pushed down in this way for so long, you know, that is going to lead to like, we think they don't have it in them because of, but you know, maybe it's what's bringing it out, right? Maybe that abuse and that sort of systematic, what they, you know, what they have suffered systematically throughout their entire lives. Like how many, like, don't they say that like the majority of women have had either verbal or physical sexual assaults, like by some ridiculously young age too? And it's you know, I think the film is saying something about, you know, what are the root causes of what happens in this movie, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, particularly verbal could happen very young with somebody that's like either a parent or a teacher or, you know,
Or just the, you know,
her,
the typical, the stereotype of the construction crew whistling at the woman as she walks by. Like they use that in Promising Young Woman. They use that specific sort of, because it is such a cliche of what we're sort of symbolizing everything that we're talking about, right?
Well,
And
my wife I'm interrupting again. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, my wife showed me a post about something about going to the gas station, and she's like, I always get hit on if I'm by the gas station alone. I'm like, really? Like that happened? She's like, yeah, all the time women get hit on if they're by themselves, even if it's like just some guy saying, "Hey, beautiful" or something. Like I was like, it's like I've never done that. She's like, well, because you're not most men, but like most men will do that.
But
Like,
hey, I've caught someone doing it to my wife before, and they just turn around and you just, like, I never say, I just stare at them like, really? And they know, and they get caught, you know, they know they're caught, and they turn around and walk. I'm like, dude, really?
Well, so then we get back to that
It's-
women love that shit comment, and however all the men laugh. Like, again, like there's this idea that men don't call each other out on this stuff, right? And you know, like at the end, there's even this bit, like, so at the very end, and Harvey Keitel's trying to stop the guy from like shooting them down, right? And he's like, this is there's still a part of him that feels like he's being super paternalistic, right? Like you're sympathetic for him because you know that he wants to get these women to safety and he wants them to be okay, but he's still being really paternalistic in terms of, hey, you know, the best thing for them is that we bring them in safely, and then, you know, they're, like I said, they're going to go to jail. Like, is that really what's best? And how do you know that that's what's best? Like, why do you get to say what's best for these women? They choose something else, right, at the end. And it is this moment, like the score, it's Hans Zimmer. Like, I didn't realize that, like, this was the first time I'd put that together. Like, again, back in the day, I wasn't paying attention to who was scoring the films, right? Now I pay a lot more attention to that. That score at the end, like that music at the end, is just like, it's liberation, and yet there's this, like, that ending is so fraught with such poles of emotions, because on the one hand you're like, they're dying, and on the other hand you're like, they're free, right? Like it's incredible that the ending is just so powerful. And again, like I question whether Harvey Keitel is really being that great in that moment. Like, yes, he's being better than the other guy who's like got all the gun, like, what is there, like 50, like, I don't know how many. There just seems like there's FBI everywhere, and it's like, what like, what's going on here? Like, he's being better than that guy, but he's still being kind of crummy in the scheme of things, I think. And again, going back to the idea of men don't call each other out on this stuff, and that's like so much of the problem, right? And I think it shows that that's what men need to do more, is call each other out when they're hearing these kind of comments, when they're seeing like, from the little stuff, from the microaggressions all the way up to the, you know, sexual assaults, right? All the way along the line, men have to hold each other accountable for this kind of stuff.
we have to hold each other accountable, and we have to stop the double standard thing that younger men, because that's taught behavior. Like, we don't automatically act this way. Like, it's taught generation from generation, this double standard, not calling each other out, just being like, oh, that's just men being men. Like, that's, and yeah, like, we all have to do better as the gender. We have to do better. Even if we're not guilty of these things, we need to like be like, that's not cool, man.
I don't know if you guys
Don't do it.
noticed, but there's a scene when they're bugging the phone just before they call one of the times, and the guys are all in Daryl's house, and the guy who's like got the headphones and is the tape reel and is the bugging guy, I guess. He's flipping casually through a porn magazine. I don't know if you noticed that. I noticed it for the first
No.
time the last time I watched
Wow.
it. And again, I think it's just little details like that that are like showing, like, just sort of commenting sort of slightly on again how men are seeing women, and how, you know, I mean, I'm assuming he didn't bring a porn magazine to his job. I'm assuming Daryl had like a Playboy or something lying around or something, right? Like, I don't know what, but it's, so he picks it up and he just casually flips through it, and the movie just sort of, as it pans by, just sort of registers this and then moves on. But I think it's, again, just those little things like that that are fascinating, right?
Yeah, and
Also,
I do love. Oh, go
yep.
ahead.
I was just going to say one
Oh,
more thing about Harvey Keitel's character and why I think he's maybe not as great as we want him to think. I noticed that, and it may not be 100% of the time, but he almost always refers to them as girls. He refers to Thelma and Louise as girls throughout the entire movie. So they're not even adults in his mind, in a way. Like, I mean, he is, like, I get that we culturally will refer to women as girls like we refer to men as guys sometimes, but there's still an infantilizing going on there, right? And so that's just, again, another thing that the film does that just sort of subtly puts those ideas into our head.
Yeah, I just love when she calls and he's trying to be all nice and sweet, that she's like, nope, cops are there.
Yeah.
Because
That's a
their
great one.
previous phone exchange, like, he's not even listening to her half the time because he's watching the game. And where was he at 4:00 in the morning?
Yep. Yep. I think we know where he probably, or have a good idea where he was.
He's probably having an affair with one of his employees at his is it a furniture store? He's the regional manager of.
Yeah.
Like, woo, dude.
Yeah. 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 Again, ideas of masculinity, right? Being sort of deconstructed there, like, you know, the ways that men build themselves up, and the movie sort of tears it down a little bit. You know, like, Thelma's, you know, she's got that moment in the car where she's like talking to him, kind of like where she's mimicking talking to him, and realizing, like, just like finally telling him off. I just, moments like that are great as she really comes into her own. I mean, by the end, you sort of feel like they're both really coming into closer to who they would want to be as people, and it is a tragedy that they don't get to be those people for very long. Like, by driving away, they get to be those people, but obviously only for a moment, right? And so there's a real tragedy there too, even though it's also this moment of empowerment for them. But I mean, I think, again, the movie is saying this is the way that women can be who they need to be, right? Like, this is the only way. Like, that's a huge indictment of, you know, we could say America, but I think it goes, you know, beyond that. It's not just it's the Western world in general. This is the option. These are the options that are available to women in our culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful.
Yeah, it's powerful, it's tragic, and I'm shocked that it took so long to get more movies like this made, even after the success of this movie. Like, this didn't start a trend or more projects similar. Like,
well, and Fried Green Tomatoes came out the same year, which I think was also a moderate hit and has similar themes, right?
Oh, it does, totally.
Yeah. Another film, as I was looking at this list of films, I was like, oh, there's a bunch here I want to rewatch, and that's for ones that I'd like to rewatch and see how it's held up, because it's been a while since I've watched that one too. But
I think those four, I think Thelma and Louise, Fried Green Tomatoes especially, but I think there's even a little bit of that going on in Silence of the Lambs and Beauty and the Beast too. Like, there's these kind of pulling the rug away from what traditional storytelling tropes are and what female characters are being portrayed as in our fiction. Like it's like no, they can be more than what we've seen them in, and like, and I think it is important that this was written by a woman and the screenwriter. And this is the one thing I don't like about the movie, and it's just probably my personal taste in music. But I think the soundtrack has aged a little and is not the best part of the film. But apparently, this is loosely based on. She got the idea while driving. I forget where back to L.A. It might have been Arizona or New Mexico, but it's loosely based on her friendship with country singer Pam Tillis. So that might be why, or is it Meg? Is it Pam, or is her name?
I think
Pam
it's Pam
Tillis?
Tillis. Yeah. I think I read that too.
Which might explain then the music choices that are in the movie, but of course they also go to a honky tonk, which is weird. Like they're like, I want to get something to eat or like a quick stop. I'm like, why would you go there for a quick stop? Like that. I'm thinking gas station.
They were doing a weekend
drive-thru.
away. They wanted to dance. They wanted to let loose. They wanted to have some fun.
Yeah.
Like, I think you're right. The soundtrack feels dated, but I mean, it centers it in that specific set of time, right? So in some ways, it does feel very early '90s in the way the soundtrack plays out. There was one line that I wrote down because it really stuck with me. And Gina Davis is looking in the rearview mirror, and she says, "I feel awake, wide awake. I don't remember feeling this awake. Everything feels different." And I just remember, like, I think that line usually hits me when I watch this movie. It's been a while since I had rewatched it, but I remember that line really stands out as being a powerful one, especially now when we look back. I mean, now, the word woke has kind of entered the lexicon, and it's kind of a thing that nobody really uses anymore except people who are trying to be critical of it. But this idea, like, there it is, and like about waking up and being awake and seeing everything differently, right? And the whole world is different. I feel like he films the movie that way a little bit. It's not like, it feels like there's more chaos. There's less, like, there's more clarity near the end in the way the cinematography works. I don't know if I can pin specific issues, but it does feel like the movie sort of moves in that direction too, in terms of providing more clarity as the movie goes along.
Yeah, I think like the camera, how they shoot, how it looks, I think it shows that there's no going back. Our world is completely changed. And of course your world completely changes after experiencing something like that. Like you're not the same person anymore after experiencing a tragedy like that.
I watched another, what I think is one of my favorite movies ever recently. Rewatched it for the first time in a while, The Shawshank Redemption, and I was stunned because I watched them both in a row. The men get to escape to Mexico in their movie. The women don't get to in theirs.
Oh, it's not fair. So I mean, another incredible movie that I think which was not a financial success and has now become like the ultimate dad movie because it's always on cable. Like, every weekend, Shawshank's on cable, and your dad's probably watching it.
Well, I think I mentioned this. I think it's been the number one movie on the IMDb 250 for a while now. Number one, right above The Godfather, I think. So, yeah. Anyways, but I just noticed this, and they both end in a similar way. But I mean, and there is a bit of a fantasy element to the ending of, you can read it in different ways in The Shawshank Redemption, right? Like maybe that's Red fantasizing as he's on the bus, right? There is a certain way you could read that. But with Thelma and Louise, it's very clear they don't get to make it. Even though, like I said, my mom and probably a lot of other people like to imagine they land on the other side and drive away.
Well, that's just because we as a society want a happy ending. We want our fiction to not resemble real life.
Right.
And sometimes, but I mean, that's terrible that for them to be free individuals and to be in control of their lives, they have to be dead. Like, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to know some other actresses that were considered for these roles? So when Michelle Pfeiffer and Jodie Foster backed out. They almost went with Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn, but they felt like Goldie Hawn wasn't right for the role.
Okay.
It almost was Meryl Streep and Cher. And
Wow.
then, but this is my favorite one. And if there was like in a multiverse version, I would like to see this version. The writer wanted Holly Hunter and Frances McDormand.
Wow.
That's
you're right.
They both have a I don't know so much Frances McDormand, but Holly Hunter has a really southern, like, I would believe that she's from Arkansas or in the area.
Well, they wanted her to be Louise. She wanted her to be Louise and Frances McDormand to be Thelma.
Wow. I could watch them. And the other combos, I'm not so sure. This is one of those ones where it feels like the casting is pretty perfect, though. Right. I was reading about character Dermot Mulroney was originally cast in Brad Pitt's role. And he dropped out.
Before that,
through George Clooney, Robert Downey Jr., Mark Ruffalo. I didn't even know he was a thing at that point. John Mellencamp, really? So a whole bunch of
I guess he was popular in '90.
Yeah, I guess. So a lot of different names of people who probably weren't very similar to Brad Pitt, weren't really people yet. They weren't really famous people yet, but would have sort of got their start. I think Brad Pitt, though, it makes sense, especially even looking back now, because he still has that, like, his most recent movie.
He's still baby-faced.
Yeah, he's got that cameo in the Sandra Bullock movie where he basically all the jokes about how handsome he is, right? Like, he's got that sort of thing to him that I think is just perfect for his role. And you can sort of buy him being a jerk too. Like, you can say that he's totally going to steal from him. I have no doubt.
You can really tell when their first encounter where they kind of ignore him is like, yeah, this guy's sleazy. Like, but he's he's got sleazy car salesman vibe. Like, he's just charming enough. He could bamboozle you if you let him.
Wow, and he's cute enough that I think that's all she was really thinking about, right? Like, and and good for, like, there's a part of me that was like, with Louise at the beginning, it's like, good for her. I know that it cost him like all that money, but she needed that, so good on her for that.
And it made him a movie star. Like, this is a movie star making role for him. Like,
did he go on to funny that River Runs Through It or something after that?
A River Runs Through It. Legends of the Fall. He gets to work with Ridley's brother in True Romance as the stoner in True Romance. Yeah. It almost was Billy Baldwin too, or William Baldwin, Adam's younger brother. Yeah. You want to know a funny story? Is George Clooney was on a flight with Gina Davis, because Gina Davis ended up picking Brad Pitt because I guess she liked reading with him the best. And Clooney's like, I auditioned for that role. We read together. And Gina Davis is like, I don't remember that. But I think even then Clooney had the gray hair. Like, I think he even had gray hair when he was like on Facts of Life and Roseanne. Like,
yeah.
So I don't.
You're right. Brad Pitt has more of a baby face. Like, he looks like he looks like the younger guy, kind of. Yeah, probably was. Again, it feels like this movie is very well cast. I really love Michael Madsen in his role too, like I said, because I think right around this time, what year was Reservoir Dogs? Like, that
it's
was
the
right
year
around
after.
This time. Yeah,
it's the year
like
after.
A major juxtaposition, right? And most of the time you see him in these kind of thug character roles, right? These crime guys, and so. I think it's perfect single play against type, but you also have just enough element of danger in him where you can see that he, again, like he said, he might not be perfect either. And I just think it's a great cast.
What's interesting is they've almost considered Madsen and Christopher McDonald for Harlan, the guy that tries to rape Thelma, and Madsen said, no, I don't want to play that role. Like, that's usually the role I get cast for.
Right.
I want to play. And then he eventually gets that role, which I think there was an older actor they were going to originally go with. So it's kind of interesting that they went with someone younger than Susan Sarandon. I'm trying to remember who it was Chris Christopherson, which you could totally see Chris Christopherson playing that. that kind
It
of
would have
role.
changed the dynamic a little for sure to have it be an older guy. And I actually like that it's a younger guy because like there's a certain amount of like, well, older guy, he's just being nice because he's mellower, or that he's like doesn't have as much. I don't know, like maybe there's something good about them having him be, a younger guy. And again, it just reverses in almost every movie, it's the older actor with the younger romantic lead, right? And so they've reversed it for both of them, and I think there's something good about that. So
yeah. Well,
but again, I watched it for the first time in a while, and it just again like loved it all the way through, like just sitting there happy and like impacted by it. It holds its power. Like it's still not boring. I can rewatch it over and over again, which is probably why I consider it one of my favorite movies, and it still impacts me. Like I still get that emotional energy each time I watch it. It's not it hasn't diluted over the years, and while it still feels very much of its time, I feel like so much of it remains relevant now.
Totally. I think I picked up on more of how relevant it was this time, because I think the last time I watched it, I was probably either in my early 20s or still a teenager. And like, where I'm like, oh, wow, this is a really powerful, moving. Like the first time I watched it, I think I was moved by it and it was like an awakening. But I think this time I was like, and maybe because of all the recency stuff coming out after, which I think is an effect of the Trump getting elected president, I think is a real effect of this. But and so if there's a good thing that have come out of that clusterfuck of a administration, is opening the door to all these things women have had to deal with for, well, I'll say centuries, because there's a movie I watched where is about a werewolf killing people, mostly women, and the sheriff's like, have women have been having to deal with this shit for years? And the female cop looks at him like, ugh.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I think the themes hit even harder because we're just more aware of like that this goes on in our society, and like it's just like so many women are silenced either because they don't tell anyone or because no one will bother to believe them or look into it.
Right. And I assume, a bunch of men that are sitting here talking about it. I'd love to get to
Right?
be able to watch a similar discussion with a bunch of women watching it for sure.
Yeah.
My wife had to go into work today, but we watched this last night, and she goes, "I want to be there so bad." I have so many things to talk about on this. I was like, it's such a shame because out of all the movies, this is one of the ones that you really need to be here for, and she couldn't help it. But
yeah, it's too bad. Yeah, it would be. I'm sure there's so much stuff that we're missing, and getting and just I'd love to hear about that. Maybe you'll have to revisit the film at some point.
I mean, it's one to revisit. I still think it's a revolutionary film, and it's one of its best of its kind. And I think it should be up there as one of Ridley Scott's best. Like it should be up there with Alien and Blade Runner, in
Oh,
my
I think it
opinion.
is. I mean, for me, it is. I'm glad it's one of the ones he got nominated for an Oscar for. I mean, the Oscars get things wrong a lot of the time, but still, I mean, that's nice that he got nominated for this one. I think it is one of the high points in his career, and I hope that people see it that way for sure. I mean, you think about Alien, there's that meme joke going around about how Alien is a movie about how nobody listens to the smart woman in the room,
right?
And everybody ends up dead except for her. I mean, it's not like he hasn't revisited these themes before, right? He's dealt with those themes before.
He's even dealing with it in The Last Duel, even though I know there's a lot of women that have issues with that movie, and I completely understand why they have issues with that movie, because it's not something to want to watch, and then you're getting all these. But it's again, it's that theme of like nobody's listening and nobody's caring what's going on. You're just going on about your business because this is the way things have been for so long, and it needs to stop.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we want to bring up before we go on and rate this movie?
I think I said most of what I had been thinking about when I rewatch this. I really appreciate being able to join you guys for this one because, like I said, it's right up there amongst some of my favorite films, and I'm glad it was a great excuse to get to watch it again and then just to discuss it. And again, every time I watch it, I'm a little bit older. Maybe I understand some of the things even more and can reflect on. I feel like I learn things more each time I watch it, so that's good too.
That means it's a great movie when
Yeah.
like you can revisit it at different points in your life and get something else out of it, or you're more aware of something, because some movies they just come and go. Like you enjoy it while you're watching it, and then it just leaves your brain as soon as it's over. So if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and rate this. So for Ridley Scott, since he has an art background and he's such a visual stylist, if we think this is a masterpiece, this is one of his best, we call it a work of art. Of course, there's the deep dive rating for something that's a little more obscure or something that's a bit more of a cult following or something for fans. If it's an entertaining film, it hits its mark. We say it's constructually sound. It was constructually sound. If it's a bit mediocre, doesn't quite make the mark, it's just a good pat on the back. Nice effort. If it was a disaster, if it's horrible, it's a bad movie, then it just goes on Ridley's mommy's fridge.
I'm gonna go with work of art. I mean, for me, I think it's like it was a popular film. It broke through into the zeitgeist. It was a critically properly recognized, I think, for being a great film. At the time, sometimes films like Blade Runner don't get that until later, and the recognition led till later. But this one got it in the moment and has stayed. Like I think it holds up. So I'm gonna go with work of art.
This is going. It's a work of art for me. Because to me, a work of art is a film that we can go back and revisit and talk about, and you're still going to get something out of it. And yeah, I'm going to go with work of art.
It's absolutely a work of art, not just because it's a road picture that looks amazing, like they make the landscape look beautiful. It's a work of art for its direction. It's a work of art for these two incredible performances. I mean, I can't tell you which one's better than the other because they're both so good. This is them at not only at the height of their careers, but this might be like them at the top of their game. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
And then just the perfection of the screenplay, the themes, like, yeah, I think there's very few modern movies I'd hold this up against. I think Promising Young Woman is a very good comparison because it's like kind of pushing it more forward of what's going on and where the discussion of abuse and allegations and people not believing and sweeping it under the rug. I think that's a nice progression, but I think if this movie wasn't there, we probably wouldn't have something like Promising Young Woman. So this is very much foreshadowing, and I think this has got to still be one of the best films dealing with this subject matter. And we all want a friend like Thelma or Louise that we'd ride or die with, right? Like, yeah. Well, Colin, thank you so much for coming on the show again. And we look forward to you coming back to talk Prometheus, another movie where they don't listen to the woman.
It's a theme in Ridley Scott movies.
Apologies that Lindsay couldn't make it. And if there's any women watching, please comment your thoughts on Thelma and Louise. Tell us what us men forgot to talk about or what we should do better. But we should all do better. And like Colin says, we should call each other out when we hear things that men say or do that are not cool. And we need to shift the double standard that men have lived in for so long, because like they say in the movie, how would you feel if someone said that to your mom or your sister or your wife? Like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You got to think of every woman as a human being. They're not just objects. They're humans just like the rest of us. So next week, feels weird. Next week we're going into his Columbus movie, which seems so weird to talk about right after Thelma and Louise. 1492, The Conquest of Paradise. But I think we do have a guest for that, but we are pairing it with, just in time for Easter weekend, we're pairing it with Kingdom of Heaven, which has similar themes, but I think is a better made movie about those
I
themes.
absolutely love Kingdom of Heaven, and now are we going with the extended cut, right?
Well, I'm watching the director's cut because
Yes.
I argue that it's even more relevant to watch that director's cut than it is the Blade Runner's director's cut, because it almost is a completely different movie from the theatrical cut.
Yeah, it fleshes it out so much.
I'm not sure I've ever seen that. I might have to watch that before you guys do it, so I can follow along.
Great movie. I
haven't
highly
seen that
recommend
for a really
movie.
long time. Yeah,
You're gonna need some time. I believe the director's cut is close to 4 hours long. It even has an intermission.
Okay. Is it available anywhere? Do you guys know if it's streaming anywhere?
I think it's on Hulu. I don't. Do they have Hulu in Canada? Though
way back when
we don't have Hulu, but our Disney Plus includes pretty much most things that are on Hulu are included in Disney Plus. There's an extra part of Disney Plus called Star, which is basically Hulu stuff. So
okay,
so
it
I'll
might be on there then.
I haven't seen that in decades, so
I'm pretty sure you can rent it off of.
Yeah. But yeah, that would be one I'd like to revisit that. Yeah, if it's definitely before you guys talk about it, so I can follow along when you do. Because, yeah,
cool.
Thank you guys.
If it's not available, oh, absolutely, you're welcome. Loved having you. Thanks for coming on. But yeah, if it's not on Disney Plus Star, it should be available to rent online. The director's cut. Chris, you want to talk about what we're doing the rest of this weekend before we go?
Yeah, tonight, 10 o'clock. I decided to go ahead and start at 10 o'clock so we could have about 45 minutes to talk about the movie. Everybody can get on. We can work out any technical difficulties, but we are going to have a watch party for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the 4K director's cut that was released on the 5th. Super stoked. I've already watched it myself. I couldn't help it, and it's gorgeous. But anyway, we'll be doing that, and then tomorrow morning around 10:30, 11, Cody, we'll have our Rejects brunch show, and we're talking on Her Majesty's Secret Service and No Time to Die. So you can join us for those if you're interested.
Well, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed No Time to Die even more the second time I watched it. Like the first time I was like, oh, that's pretty good, but like this time I'm like, no, this is actually top 10 Bond movie for me. So
for me, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is one of my favorite Bonds. So
that's my absolute favorite one.
Oh yeah, it's up. It's not my absolute favorite, but it's up there for sure, within the top 2 or 3 for sure. Yeah. I'm about to run off and see Nitram, I think. I'm hoping if I can get to the cinema in time. The Caleb Landry-Jones won, I think, actor at Cannes for it. So I'm looking forward to it. It looks like a disturbing film. So we'll see how that is.
Well, let's get you out of here so you can go catch that movie. And
thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for your incredible thoughts and opinions on this incredible film. I really loved your viewpoints and perspective. So thank you.
Thanks. It was fun to talk to you. You guys are always fun to discuss with. So I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, can't wait to talk about Prometheus, a movie that I'm glad somebody else will defend besides me.
I'm in your corner.
I like Prometheus.
Well, thank you all for watching. Catch us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Colin, if you want to plug your social media, you can, but if you don't, you don't have to.
That's all great. Thanks.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your movie. And thank you again for coming on the show with us.
Great. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye.